Good morning, folks. My name is Jimmy Bashar with the ISO Stakeholder Affairs Group. My pleasure to welcome you to the ISO Stakeholder Call to discuss the draft tariff language for Phase 2 of our Hybrid Resources Initiative. I am joined today by our primary presenter, Bill Weaver from our legal department, as well as Andrew Ulmer from our Federal Regulatory Affairs Group, including as well Gabe Murtaugh from our Market and Infrastructure Policy Group and Mike Turner from our Model and Contracting Group. In addition, our calls and webinars are recorded for stakeholder convenience, allowing those who are unable to attend to listen to the recordings after the meetings. The recordings will be publicly available on the ISO webpage for a limited time following the meetings. And of course, the recordings and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without ISO's permission. And lastly, of course, we welcome questions. We ask that you please raise your hand virtually by pressing #2. And we, of course, request that you please state your name and the company that you represent. We do encourage verbal questions. However, if I do see anything written, we'll do our best to verbalize it for folks. And with that, I'll hand it over to Bill.
Thanks, Jimmy. Good morning, everyone, and happy Tuesday. This is Bill Weaver from the CAISO Legal Group, and we're talking about the Hybrid Resources draft tariff language that we posted last month. This is for hybrid resources. I think what will be this is Phase 2, and we'll probably have a Phase 2A and a Phase 2B. What I mean by that is that in terms of FERC filings, just to be transparent about our plan so everyone understands and can make priorities, is that we will almost certainly file the co-located deviation language at the beginning of the year, sort of as a standalone set of tariff provisions to get that into the tariff and have it be there. Nearly everything else we expect will not be filed until the summer or the fall, waiting for a fall 2021 technology implementation. So with the tariff language in mind, it's likely that we will repost the revised tariff language, and we'll probably just repost everything. But I would hope that, stakeholders will likely have another call on the rest of the language, but we probably won't have time for another, set of comments and call. And we really didn't get a lot of comments on the co-located deviation language. That said, if you see the revised tariff language next week and you have concerns about that co-located deviation language, please feel free to just reach out to me or to Gabe directly, either by phone or by email. I'm at bweaver@kaiso.com. And then likely after we file this Phase 2A, the co-located deviation language, the beginning of 2021, we'll come back to the rest of the language, maybe have another call, and to go over that as we develop it toward a fall 2021 implementation. So that's that. So without further ado, and I would ask Jimmy and our operator to just jump in if there are any hands raised or whatnot, because I'm sharing my screen and can't see anything. I'll try to pause for questions, but sometimes you let me know.
We do have one caller in the queue.
Okay, well, go ahead. We'll pause here for administrative questions.
All right. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Bill. Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Just a really quick question about the process you just laid out. I guess I'd encourage you to file the tariff language maybe and not wait quite so long for the second tranche of tariff language, only because it's sometimes easier when you're going through the software development and people are signing contracts and all that to have defined tariff terms available to use for things like contracting. So if it's possible to go in a little earlier than, summer or fall, or maybe early in the summer or even in the spring for that second bunch of tariff language, that just would really help people to have that information already in the tariff instead of sort of hanging around not quite developed,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good note, Susan. And yeah, we do, you know, the FERC regulations generally, you know, require us to file 2 to 4 months in advance. And, you know, we would like on this probably to target, you know, that outset 4-month date. In any case, though, hopefully the tariff language itself is done and posted, you know, well before that. And so at least, you know, through this process, it's on the website and people can refer to what will be the tariff language. And hopefully we don't take too many changes from that to FERC. But in any case, you know, I think, you know, that's a good comment, and we'll try to shoot for that as a goal.
Yeah, because if you post it, if there's still a possibility you might change it, you know, that sometimes will cause people problems. Yeah. So if you already have it all done, is there any real reason to wait?
I mean, just the fact that we have to by FERC regulation, like we can ask for a waiver if we're filing outside of 4 months, and you know maybe that they would find that as good cause as people are developing their contracts. But you know it's not a guarantee to get that waiver. If anything, it's actually a pretty high burden. So we'll definitely consider it and talk about it internally. I'm certainly not saying no on this call. I'm saying, you know, it is a good goal for us to have, and I understand what you're saying.
Okay, great. Thanks for your consideration.
Thanks, Susan. All right, so with the administrative issues out of the way, I will go ahead and go through these. We're not going to go through every stakeholder comment we received. We received comments from Phoenix Consulting on behalf of EDF and the Large Scale Solar Association, and I feel like I'm missing one more. We also received comments from OEA and PG&E, and we appreciate all their comments. And we're still discussing these internally. What we really wanted to do is give time. We wanted to give extra time for people to comment over the Thanksgiving holiday and get a call in, you know, sort of before Christmas, without, you know, bogging everyone down. But we do hope to repost the language and the stakeholder comments matrix addressing everything, you know, hopefully next week and the week after at the latest, so everyone can see what we're thinking and whatnot. But we'll try to go through as many comments as possible, and if people have anything that's very pressing, you know, feel free to jump in queue and we can address it. But so I'll just go through these at a high level and address the comments that we think we're pressing. So co-located resource and hybrid resource, those definitions, you know, they're in black because they've already been approved by FERC and they're already part of the tariff, and we're not proposing to change them. Here we have the new terms, high sustainable limit and the hybrid dynamic limit, which I believe in the policy papers was the dynamic limit tool. We changed the terminology a little because, you know, something we probably should have put in the policy. Using the term dynamic is a little confusing because dynamic is used for a much different purpose in the tariff, you know, mainly for dynamic schedules at the interchanges. So we wanted to add hybrid in here just to change the terminology a little going forward. And I know we're going to get comments about this, but maybe let's hold off on hybrid dynamic limit questions until I get to the actual provision on them, which should be shortly below. We received some comments asking for revised definitions on components and you know, calling out the VER component and the intermittent component or the storage component expressly. We were still considering those. I think, you know, in general, when a word means what it means in English in the tariff, we don't see we don't see a compelling need to make it into a defined term. If anything, it can overly restrain us and cause confusion and take away flexibility for market participants going forward. But like I said, we're still considering it, whether it will, you know, add clarity there. Let me get into the provisions here. This first section is from Order 841, just talking about the extra storage characteristics. parameters that are outlined elsewhere in 27.9 that resources with storage technologies can use. So this isn't too much of a meaty section, but we want to reference hybrids just to be sure. Okay, but here we are at the meat of what will be, this tariff filing, which is, kind of outlining the general terms and provisions for hybrid resources. This first sentence just incorporates section 4.6 by reference because there are we didn't want to repeat everything for hybrid resources that we do for generators and other supply resources, like the fact that they're required to have a scheduling coordinator and submit bids and whatnot. The second sentence here is the general language we use about all master file characteristics for all types of resources. That's worth repeating here, as is this next section. So here we have this language that says hybrid resources will use the non-generator resource model, but are ineligible to use REM. There were comments on both of these comments. I'll address the first. I think the paper was clear that hybrid resources will be using the NGR model, where we proposed that for a variety of reasons. First, hybrid resources with a storage component, will have a PMIN below 0, and only the NGR model allows that. Additionally, only the NGR model is built to track and to give scheduling coordinators the capabilities that are common to storage. And we don't see any compelling need to work on the gen model as well and make similar changes there when we already have it for the NGR model. As for REM, it was never proposed that hybrid resources would be able to use REM. The obviously quick counter-argument is that we didn't say they couldn't use it either, but I don't think that was really necessary. The REM model is only for pure storage resources to receive a constant telemetry signal to provide regulation through the battery storage component, constantly going up and down, below 0 and above 0 to provide regulation. So this is just a clarification consistent with that. I will pause here to see if there are any questions.
We do have one question in the queue. Okay. Caller, your line is now unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Susan Schneider again, Phoenix Consulting. Just before you leave the earlier definition section, we had put in a pitch, and I know Gabe and I discussed this a little bit earlier. There was great confusion even at the board meeting about the idea of hybrid resources, low or non-capitalized term versus capitalized term. And so if there's any way to put in that mixed fuel resource, mixed fuel project term that you had in under phase 1 and then took out, that would really be helpful, because I think when you start talking about hybrid resources and it's not capitalized, you got lowercase, people don't know if you're talking about the capitalized hybrid resources or the lower or the general mixed fuel project category. It's been confusing the whole time, and so I just wanted to put a pitch in for that. I think it was just, like I said, even at the board level, it was confusing. If any way to consider that, that would really be helpful.
Let me address that first, and then we'll go on the other ones.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree, Susan. I wish we had thought of that, especially in the policy phase, and I think it will be a useful term as we discuss these things going forward, certainly in like the BRS, the Business Practice Manual, certainly in our terminology. I'm struggling to, I'm not struggling, okay, I'll say, we're considering whether it's necessary in the tariff, because in the tariff we're only calling hybrid resources, hybrid resources. And anyways, it's something we're considering. If there's a place to talk about the mixed fuel concept, but so far, the tariff only kind of talks about the two separate buckets. Maybe in the interconnection land, it might be necessary to add that term. So it's something we're considering. It's a point well taken. Yeah.
I think also not only in the tariff, but when it's defined in the tariff, it goes into a lot of other documents like technical specifications and technical bulletins and BPM language, and so it really would be helpful to have that as a defined tariff term, even in maybe the filing you're going to make on the co-located resource flexibility proposal, because it just gets, when you start even talking about other documents, then the lack of clarity is a problem throughout anywhere you're talking about these things. And so I would encourage you to not only put it in, but try and move it up a little bit, because it's really, it's causing confusion now, and we haven't even got too much into this. So let me, if you consider it, we really appreciate that. Okay, so let me get into what you just talked about here with the NGR and the GEN and all that. First of all, you guys have a technical bulletin that you issued in 2016 that says that hybrid resources, small h, small r, mixed fuel projects, I guess would be just hybrid resources capitalized, can use either the NGR model or the GEN model, and it's in your own technical bulletin. And every time I've asked it in the stakeholder process, basically the response was, oh yeah, okay, I guess you can use that too. If resources don't want to charge from the grid, and so, then they might want to choose the generation model or the GEN model. And it's not the idea that it was mandatory to use NGR was something not discussed in the stakeholder process. And in fact, every time I brought it up, it seemed like people said, yeah, it's okay to use that other one too. So I don't see any reason to mandate that if people do not want the option to be charging from the grid. That may be one way they manage that with these kind of resources. So that's
yeah. Let me address.
Go ahead.
Let me address. Yeah, I'll address that two ways, and then I'll throw
Sure.
Gabe's body in front of the bus for me. But I think I'm not arguing with you, because I think yes, I was I certainly heard the same consideration during the call. There were certainly times earlier in the stakeholder process where we said it might be possible to use the GEN model. That said, in reviewing the draft final, I think it's very clear, we say expressly there, these resources will use the NGR model. And
we put in that same comment for that particular thing.
We are there for that. So, but I think on the policy issue, as it were, we're just not feeling a compelling need for anyone to use the GEN model, and we do see a compelling need for everyone to use the NGR model. So I'll stop here, see if Gabe wants to add anything.
Bill, I don't have a whole lot to add to that.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a question. Could somebody use the NGR model and have a minimum, and basically still have a minimum output of 0 instead of negative?
Yeah, so in this draft tariff language, we wrote that, did we write this, or did we take it out? Well, master file characteristics have to reflect the physical, physical operating characteristics of the resource, as opposed to their economic constraints, which include contracting constraints. So ultimately, the resource type and the master file characteristics are going to represent only the physical and operating characteristics and not the economic ones in terms of, not ICP considerations. The scheduling coordinator will have to be responsible for managing that aspect.
Well, except that what that means basically is that you've taken away that one of the tools that they would have to do that. And I think it's really important that they have that ability to limit, and it leaves them open. Potentially, do they have to bid it then, or are they open to an exceptional dispatch to use that part of the range even if they don't want to? It's not clear how they can protect themselves if they don't have that option.
Yeah, and we're definitely sensitive to that. We understand we just really don't want to. This concept that we're talking about with accurate master file characteristics is bigger than the ITC issue. And even if I proposed in my FERC filing, allowing that, if we just totally agreed, there are really significant odds that FERC would just reject it out of hand, because to the extent we've ever tried to allow economic considerations before, FERC has come down and dropped the hammer on it. So
when
it's
did
not
that
something
happen?
that we're inclined to do. Just in the last couple of years, I'm sure your clients in the developer community can tell you that there have been a number of compliance instances with accurate master file characteristics not reflecting economic considerations. In any case, it's what the tariff says now, and we're not proposing to change that policy. So, Gabe, did you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I mean, it confuses me a little bit. I think the ISO's policy has been pretty straightforward and pretty consistent in that, we want master files to be a representation as best as possible of how resources can actually perform in the market. The ISO does not observe, and we don't want to observe contractual obligations as precursors to market performance. We want what constrains actual market performance to be the physical characteristics of resources. So I think, and I think we had some language in the paper to that effect. Now, if a resource is, we have this hybrid resource and it is connected to the grid or a co-located resource, and it really is not physically capable of charging from the grid, then of course we would model that in master file as a P-min of 0, and we wouldn't ever be charging that resource from the grid. But to the extent that a resource is capable of grid charging, I think the ISO policy is for that to be reflected in master file, and for the economic incentives that are driving that grid charging to be reflected as well. So if there is a very large price or a loss that is suffered because the resource does charge from the grid, we'd want that to be bid in, just like other parameters are bid into our markets. And then that
what if it exceeds the price cap, or on the negative side?
Gabe, this is Andrew and Ulmer with the California ISO. And Susan, I had a question for you. In this discussion we're having, it's in the context of co-located resources. If you had a co-located electric or battery storage
this is hybrid resources. This is the hybrid resource definition here, or term.
I see.
The title of this section is hybrid resources.
Yeah. Okay.
4.18.
Okay. But you're asking a question: can the battery energy storage system component of a hybrid resource never charge from the system, but instead from the grid, instead charge only from on-site supply?
Yes, the tax credit and the federal policy certainly encourages that very, very strongly, and there's strong economic incentives to do that. So, to the extent that the ISO tariff shouldn't be conflicting with federal policy either, certainly not make it difficult to comply. So, what we've seen with questions that people have been blogging as we've gone through this initiative is people looking for ways in which they can comply with that incentive and that policy decision on the federal level, and protect themselves against loss of that incentive, or that credit. So that's the nature of the sort of the background for me asking this question. I don't know exactly how people will choose to use them, but to limit it and to say they have to expose themselves, even though the federal policy encourages them not to, I think you have a real conflict there.
Yeah, no, Susan, I don't think anybody's arguing that the federal policy is encouraging resources not to charge from the grid. We certainly understand that. But they're doing that at a price. You know, they're saying, well, if you do charge from the grid at 1% of the time or 2% of the time, it's going to cost you this much money in terms of your ITC. And to the extent that that can be that value can be identified, we just like to have that as a bid-in parameter into the market, because we'd like more, we'd like as much flexibility in terms of charging our resources as possible.
I understand what you'd like to have, but I guess what I'm saying is the resource owners, and in fact, there are many PPAs that are being signed that simply prohibit grid charging for the first 5 years. I mean, and I know you don't like that.
Which
but that's
confusing to me, because the federal policy certainly doesn't prohibit grid charging. It discourages it, as I said. So it
yeah. Well, here, this is Bill. Let's, because we're really not talking about tariff language anymore. We're really talking about the policy.
Okay. Anyway, so let's get back to this. Okay, I agree with you. Let's get back to this.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point is, you have a bulletin that's out there that allows people to use the GEN model. There's a very valid reason why they would want to use the GEN model. And other than saying, we just prefer to use something else, that's good and all good. And if the CAISO market parameters dictate that, maybe people will choose to do that. But it doesn't really justify removing the option of the GEN model from when it really other than you just don't want, you'd rather have people use the other one.
Well, I think that's somewhat of a straw man, but we understand your point, and it's something that we will consider as we go forward.
Okay. And then as far as REM goes, this issue was not raised one way or the other, so a prohibition against REM. I don't know if these resources would actually want to use REM, to be honest with you, but since it was, what's really troublesome is when you start raising issues in tariff language that were not discussed in any way, and it would be perfectly legitimate if you want to put this in a proposal and have people discuss it. But it wasn't in the proposal, and so it's true it wasn't not in the proposal. I mean, it didn't say you could or couldn't, but the issue wasn't even raised. And so when you start raising issues in the tariff language, which is only supposed to implement policy, that when this was not even raised in the policy discussion, it's troublesome.
I take your point. I don't disagree. I wish we had raised it in the policy. Ultimately, however, the only thing that would be even worse than raising it in the tariff language would be not raising in the tariff language, and then all of a sudden we have a tariff that is ambiguous on the subject when these resources are actually out there. So I agree that raising in the policy would have been better. We're raising it now to clarify it so that it's actually out there when these resources come around. In any case, like I said, everything but the co-located deviation language is going to be for later, so we'll keep having these discussions. We certainly take the note. Okay. Thanks, Susan.
All right. Sure.
Yeah, and no surprises in any of those comments there. I mean, those were very consistent with what you and stakeholders said.
We have 3 other folks in the queue.
Oh, okay. Well, let's go.
All right. Next caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Good morning. This is Alva from PG&E.
Hey, Alva.
Hi. 2 points basically on the last discussion. One in your favor and one in Susan's favor. The one in your favor, I think it has been clear in the definition of the hybrid resource specifically that the CAISO was excluding any active management of state of charge. And in fact, when you say the NGR model is being used, it's specifically the NGR model without active state of charge management. And in my opinion, REM is included under that heading. It involves the ISO actively managing the state of charge of a resource. So I wholeheartedly agree with the exclusion, and it's just simply being a clarification based on the previous discussions that have been had. The second point, but on the other side, is that the NGR model with no management of state of charge excludes any minimum generation, any startup cost, any minimum uptime, minimum downtime, all of the characteristics of a thermal resource that might be necessary to capture physically in the master file. So unless you're explicitly excluding thermal resources from the hybrid model, and you may be, I'm just contributing to the discussion here, but unless you've explicitly excluded resources that have a minimum, any of the commitment characteristics of a resource, I'm strongly of the belief that you should allow the GEN model as an option based on your own statements that the physical characteristics of a resource need to be captured. Thank you.
Thanks, Ala. Good comments. Next caller.
All right, next caller. Your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, gentlemen. It's Chris Devin with CES. Good morning. I just wanted to chime in here and make the same comments that Elba from PG&E just made about the generation component model as well. I think it was always contemplated during the discussions during the stakeholder process that there was going to be thermal resources that added storage and they would be able to operate under the generator model. So I do have some concerns here about the inclusion of the language in the final proposal that would restrict this to only NGR model. I think that's kind of inappropriate, but there wasn't a lot of discussion during the stakeholder meeting on that piece. So just to put it in here now, I just have some concern. I think it's going to reduce the flexibility of folks to be able to utilize that. And I do believe that there are some resources out there, like including the wellhead SCE resources that are modeled as generators that have storage already under that. The point that Susan made, about how there's already a technical bulletin that allows for that. So I would encourage you guys to rethink that piece of it and just wanted to throw my 2 cents in. But I'll stop there because I think we don't need to continue that discussion any further at this point. But.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. And I'm not trying to, curb discussion, and I think it really is, it's helpful, the comment, you just made and that Alva made that provide examples, that show where our thinking might be, falling in between the cracks here. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, but I don't want to go over it anymore, so I'll let it
go. Okay. Thanks, Chris. One more?
Last caller. Your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Carrie Bentley with the Western Power Trading Forum. I had the same comment as the last 2 callers, but I guess it was more of a question. It was that during the policy, it seemed like hybrid resource was technology neutral, and now the definition is specific to VERs and eligible intermittent resources. So whether, Susan was talking about a name change, whether you mean hybrid VER resources now rather than hybrid resources. But I think you get it, so I won't belabor that point. The next question I had is back to the operating characteristics and master file. So a lot of developers, I think, are assuming that they're going to be able to put in a physical constraint so that they physically cannot grid charge. Would that mean that under this definition, they would be able to set their design capabilities in the master file to not grid charge in the market? Does that fall under this kind of definition?
What would the physical constraint look like, Carrie?
I believe a lockout.
Like a breaker?
A breaker, yeah. And, concurring with everything Susan said, I know Gabe has said many times that it could be priced, but the reason why it wouldn't be priced in the market is because the developer and the scheduling coordinator are completely different entities. So the developer is selling to an off-taker, and so in that contract, it would prevent any sort of pricing of it. And the scheduling coordinator then has no control over putting in a price. So the way that most people have solved that is by putting in a breaker. So I just want to make sure that if we do put in a breaker, this allows them to reflect that situation in the master file.
Mm-hmm. We will, I have thoughts there. But I'll just say we're considering it. I'll get back to you. We'll get back to you. When we repost this language, we'll have more clarity on that question. Gabe, did you have anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything more to add than what's already been talked about. So I'll wait for now. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
Carrie, I did want to address your first comment on the variable question. No, we certainly didn't mean to imply here in the policy or in this draft tariff language that we were somehow excluding thermal-based hybrids. The reason why we talk about variable intermittent resources throughout the draft tariff language so much is because we just think that those are important clarifications to make sure hybrid resources are excluded from all those tariff provisions about VERS and EIRs, whereas the same isn't necessarily true about thermal resources. We don't have to make as many clarifications there, but we certainly didn't mean to exclude any technology type from the hybrid resource model. It's sort of just tariff homework that we're doing. Okay, let's see. I believe we are here. So as I just told Carrie, this is really just a clarification, tariff homework. We expect that the vast majority of these, based on what we see in Q and what we see in the modification process in Q for existing resources, are going to be either storage plus solar or storage plus wind. And so we want to just clarify that under Order 764, under our tariff, these aren't VERS or EIRs and aren't subject to all the various VER and EIR tariff language, except for what we clarified in the hybrid phase 1 filing about the meteorological requirements for those resources. Again, here, I don't think this should surprise anyone. This is kind of repetitive language just to stress that that the two different components require their own metering and telemetry for monitoring purposes and also for renewable reporting purposes. We have the high sustainable limit as well. And so I'll continue from here. So this is the bidding section on hybrid resource bids. Again, they have all the available bidding parameters for general supply resources. And then we also have the hybrid dynamic limit. Now, this is where we received the majority of the rest of the stakeholder comments was on, this verb will submit. There was, a number of comments asking us to change that to may submit. Excuse me. I'll say, we're considering those comments. However, we think we have it right here at this point. We do not say what those hybrid dynamic limits necessarily have to be that the scheduling coordinator submits, but the scheduling coordinator does need to submit them. This is our only way to track what the resources capabilities are to ensure feasible dispatches through the optimization. We don't want, resources heavily relying on outage cards or anything else to provide their real-time characteristics. And so that's why we've created the hybrid dynamic limit. We also don't really see an argument why scheduling coordinators, wouldn't want to submit the hybrid dynamic limit at any time, or why that would somehow be a constraint. So I'm going to pause here and see if we have any questions.
We have 2 questions in the queue at this time. First caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Bill. Carrie Bentley with Western Power Trading Forum again. Sorry, they cut me off, so I couldn't respond to your last response to me. It was that last line above, sorry to go back, but it says hybrid resources that include a storage component. So it makes it sound like in the section that storage component is optional, but if you go above, it says that they must provide telemetry and meter data on intermittence. So it was those last maybe 3 sentences that made it sound like hybrid resources have to have a VER component And I know it's more of an implication than your intent, but that's why it's like, oh, it could include storage, but you have to provide variable or intermittent data. Do you see that when you reread it?
Yeah, I understand. That's a good call, Carrie. We'll tinker with that.
Okay, thanks. And then on the hybrid resource bids, does this imply that they have to submit accurate upper and lower economic limits? Because the scheduling coordinators will just be estimating them as well. And I'm wondering if there's some sort of implication that if you get your limit wrong, whether that would be a tariff violation.
I think that would be pretty difficult for us to enforce, assuming, the hybrid dynamic limits are submitted, on a good faith basis, right? We understand that, like you just said, they're really trying to predict the weather here, get as accurate as possible. Now, obviously, if we saw, gross abuses, persistent abuses, then we obviously retain the option to refer them to DMM or for Office of Enforcement. But no, at the outset, I don't think, we would be heavily policing this, especially for, good faith uses. Gabe, did you have anything you want to address there?
No, Bill, I'd agree with you on that.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Carrie.
All right, we have one other caller in the queue. Caller, if your line is now muted, please go ahead.
Yeah, this is Susan Schneider again. I guess I'm not understanding your statement where you say first of all, this was not mentioned as a mandatory tool. This is a tool available, not something that would have to be used. And I don't understand your statement about, well, you want to know if the dispatch is feasible if you don't have this, if this tool is not used and updated every 5 minutes, because you will have not only the high sustainable limit, which is required, you will have the actual output of the variable resource, so you know what the resource is producing, and you will have the state of charge because that's also required. So you will have everything you need to determine whether a dispatch instruction is going to be feasible. So I don't understand why you have to have yet another thing to give you the same information, basically, or some interpretation of that information, because you haven't really told people how to do, things like high sustainable limit. And so I'm not understanding why. If you have a variable resource part, you have everything you were going to have for what would be a standalone variable resource. You have the state of charge for the storage. What is it that you don't know about what this resource is able to do?
I'm going to let Gabe address this question. Thanks, Susan.
So, Susan, you're concerned with us requiring that the high sustainable limit be submitted to the ISO?
No, this is the hybrid. Yeah, you're talking about hybrid dynamic limits, but that's supposed to be something separate from the high sustainable limit, which is required. So you already have that. This is a dynamic limit, which is some kind of mushing all these things together to tell you something. But the point is, you've already got you've got the variable resource. You've got a forecast, not only what the variable resource is doing, you've got what the forecast of what the variable resource is going to do, and you have the high sustainable limit, and you have the state of charge. So what is it you don't know about what this resource can do as far as a feasible dispatch instruction?
Well, yeah, I mean, your point's taken. We will have the information essentially to be able to construct, for the most part, what the high sustainable limits are that we expect to be submitted. Dynamic.
Well, the high sustainable limit is going to be submitted. You're already going to have that.
Yeah.
And the forecast.
So,
and the actuals.
I mean, so Susan, your point is that we have all of the information coming to the ISO that could be used to construct the dynamic limit. Is that correct?
Well, what I'm saying is the statement was you do not know, but the only way to ensure, I wrote this down, but I apologize if I'm paraphrasing. The only way to use this tool is the only way to ensure feasible dispatch instructions. And I don't understand the statement.
So
you have a lot of information, a huge amount of information for that purpose.
So I think, I don't want to get into too pedantic of a conversation here, but I understand what you're saying about the information that's being submitted to the ISO. What we don't have is a specific system that tells, and yes, I agree we could build such a system, but we don't have, and we're not anticipating building such a system at the time that this Hybrid Resources Initiative is implemented. Because converting all that information that we are collecting would take developmental effort on the part of the ISO to be able to interpret and use in our systems. So we're not, I'm not saying that we're never going to actually do that. At the time that we're implementing this policy, though, which is coming up very shortly in just a few months, we're not going to have the capability to actually do that.
So you're going to require every single, you guys can't build the capability, but you're going to require every single scheduling coordinator to do that separately. It's a little bit of a strange construct, and also since you already have this for variable resources, and you already have this for storage resources, and all you got, I understand this is easy for me to say because I'm not a software developer, but you just have to draw a line between them somehow. You've already got everything you need right there, and you already use those inputs for separate resources that have exactly the same components, and you are going to have more information because that high sustainable limit is not, you don't even currently have that for variable resources. So it doesn't seem, again, easy for me to say, I know, but it doesn't seem that difficult to do rather than have people give you some unverifiable thing that you're saying, well, we're not going to look at it too closely, and people can do this and estimate it in whatever way they do, and which could be completely inconsistent with each other in whatever way they give it to you. It seems like a strange construct here to say that now in order to do that, now you're going to mandate that they give you something else, but not track how they do it or track whether it's accurate. Or, you know what I'm saying? It just seems like a strange way to do this instead of just building the system right on your side with all the data you're already going to have.
Right, exactly. We're saying exactly the same things here. The reason we aren't doing what you're suggesting right now is because of the developmental effort. The ISO was under a lot of pressure, is under a lot of pressure to get a model out there that would work for hybrid resources in 2021. And this is what we can deliver from a developmental perspective. We are opening up another hybrid resources stakeholder initiative. I think it's going to be called Hybrid Evolution or something.
Yeah, I saw that.
Here. And I think one of the objectives of that policy is also going to be building such a tool so that hybrid resource owners don't have to submit this to the ISO. But we just, if we're talking about developing something like that prior to 2021, from what I've heard from our technology team, it's not feasible with the time frame that we have right now.
Okay, so let me ask this a different way then. Okay, so if what you're going to do instead of assuming that the bids they give you were feasible and dispatching accordingly and not looking at any of this other data you're getting, you're going to use the hybrid dynamic limits, which are also you're not going to verify in advance. And use those to assume that that's going to be feasible. So instead of just assuming that the bids are feasible, you're going to have this separately submitted information that you're also not going to verify, and then you're going to assume that that will make it feasible. Anyway, it's just, again, it's a little bit of a strange construct here, and I urge you, this is another situation, by the way, where you did not propose in the stakeholder process on the policy end that this is a mandatory tool. And then here you are now in the tariff language putting in a new proposal, and I think that, again, is sort of disturbing here. So give some thought to, so instead of having one unverifiable thing, you'll have two unverifiable things and hope that it'll all work out. Seems odd.
Well, I think, I mean, you're correct in the points that you're making. We aren't going to be doing any testing of validity of these bids prior to of the dynamic limit prior to the fact. But after the fact, we certainly could, and we certainly could do spot checks to ensure and to ensure that resources are following the letter of the rules that we're putting in here in the tariff. I would also add, that's the reason, the reason we're building this tool like this is so that resources can have an option under the hybrid tool to model their resources. And once they have this option, they will be given this capability, which I think I would agree with you. This is a little bit strange and it's not conventional, particularly when we've got this very well built out model for EIR resources or VER resources. But I think, exactly like we've been talking about, we're trying to move in that direction. We're just not able to get there with this policy. Hopefully we will be able to in the future, though, build this model.
Instead of using the resources to build a whole new tool, why don't you just use the resources to use the data you're already getting to make sure that you get
we've consulted with our technology group, and they said that was not possible in the time frame that we're giving them. Or not.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm not going to beat the dead horse anymore, but it's just, again, the idea that this is now a mandatory thing could have been put and should have been put in the policy discussion, and it was not. And I think this is just a bad habit you're getting into, where you think of something later and then decide to throw it in the tariff language. That's not really a very good practice, and what is a fairly lengthy and detailed stakeholder initiative. So anyway, I'm done.
Okay, thanks, Susan. And yeah, all points well taken. So let's move on to market power mitigation, a subject with no controversy. Oh, I'm sorry. Do we have more callers?
Yes, we do. I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Okay. Yep, let's go ahead.
Your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, it's Carrie Bentley with the Western Power Trading Forum. I have a follow-up to the conversation you just had with Susan. I thought you guys were going to use the forecast and state of charge to limit the schedules, and that's why it was okay. You didn't have the hybrid dynamic limit in the day-ahead market. So can you clarify if you're not allowing the hybrid dynamic limit and you're not implementing the functionality to limit the bids based on state of charge and forecast, what's going to happen in the day-ahead market?
Dave, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, market participants using the hybrid resources model will be required to bid into the day-ahead market in such a way that the market results will be consistent with what they're able to produce, which is a heavy burden. Yeah, exactly like you say, Carrie, there is no check on, we're not going to be modeling state of charge for hybrid resources in the day-ahead market. We're not going to be modeling expected, VER output for a hybrid resource in the day-ahead market. These are only going to be based on bids. We do have, or we are updating our day-ahead market tools so that hybrid resources will not be able to be rucked up to their PMAX. They're only going to be able to be rucked up to the bids that are submitted. So it really is dependent on the bids that are input by market participants in day-ahead market to ensure that these resources don't receive ineligible dispatches in that market. And then, yeah, once we turn our attention to the real-time market, that's when we would expect that hybrid resources would use the dynamic limit tool to ensure feasible dispatches there.
Okay. I don't think that was quite clear in the policy, but I appreciate the explanation. Oh, actually, Dave, one more thing. When you do default energy bids for the hybrid resources, you'll probably have to do a hybrid dynamic limit at that time, right? So kind of doing your own hybrid dynamic limit is tentatively on your roadmap.
Yeah. We are planning to tackle the default energy bids for hybrid resources next year as well. I'm a little bit nervous about that policy. I think, the DEBs for storage resources were very complicated, and then mixing that in with like a storage plus a VER component is going to be even more challenging. So I think that's going to be a very difficult initiative. But yes, we are trying to tackle that next year. I think there's a lot of implications with what comes along with that once we start diving into the dev components. But I think that is one feature that we would need to have as well. But you're right.
Thanks.
Yep. No, good question.
Right. Next caller.
Other questions?
Next caller, your line is now unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hello, this is Alva again. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Alva.
Hi. This is follow-up also. I just had 2 points, both agreeing and disagreeing with your conversation with Susan. I think one of the basic things that she's missing in claiming that there's a way for you to do this yourselves is the volitional charging of the battery during the solar periods. That's, to me, is the most important reason you have the dynamic limit, is so that somebody can essentially tell you that they're going to be charging, and so they're going to restrict the upper limit on their bid based on something they're doing that you have absolutely no way to forecast. So I'm very much in favor of the dynamic limit tool. However, I think her basic point that it shouldn't be required is also absolutely correct, and that this is going to be an issue for you when you don't receive, when there's just a failure of data as well. You have to have a default. In my opinion, the default should simply be the submitted minimum and maximum on the bid in the particular hour. And essentially what you're doing with the dynamic limit tool anyway is overriding that minimum and maximum limit. So I don't see a problem with that not being mandatory, but what happens is in real time, the market participant is exposing themselves to a lot of risk by simply retreating to the PMAX and PMIN that they submitted for the real-time bids. So you're giving people a tremendous advantage. If they don't want to take advantage of it, there's absolutely no reason that you should require them to, and in fact, you won't be able to require them to under conditions that actually will exist. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, fair points. Thanks, Alva. Any other callers in queue?
Yes, we have one last caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, guys. It's Chris Devins from Customized Energy Solutions again. And yet again, I wanted to say the same things that Alva just mentioned. So he put that probably better than I would have stated it. But that was really the extent of what I wanted to note, is just that my understanding of the whole policy development was that this would be optional, and that the bids in the real-time market would essentially discipline, the behavior if folks decided not to put in hybrid dynamic limits. So, in my mind, you really can't be doing the hybrid dynamic limit by, some software designed by the ISO for the reason that Alva just mentioned, that, the charging and discharging decision done by the scheduling coordinator. And there's really good reasons for doing that. And I think it's that you're trying to, allow the flexibility of the use of the resource to be able to capture the benefits of that combined resource and the ITC and all those other things that we talked about in the policy development. So just wanted to throw that out there as well, just some support for reconsidering this one. I think, the real issue here is that is the ISO comfortable with the market outcomes disciplining the behavior, or are you guys going to have more command and control and want to force people to put in these hybrid dynamic limits? Because I think there's times when they're really not necessary in the real time. I mean, think about it in the evening when there's no solar output. You really need to have a dynamic limit. Why can't you just use the real-time bids from the storage component, essentially during the nighttime? It doesn't seem to be that problematic in my mind. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. All right. Continuing on, I'm at 22% done, but I think in pages, but I think we've done most of the substance of the comments. Here we're clarifying that the hybrid resources will not be subject to market power mitigation. And this language will be a little in flux with ESRA 4 as well, as the standalone batteries do come under market power mitigation. Same thing here in the real-time tariff language. We received a comment, I know, on this last section that's saying, well, this is confusing. What is this talking about? This last sentence is talking about the generic NGR model, which is used for EIM entities, essentially. I admit it is confusing now with hybrids, and so, yeah, it likely is that we need to clarify this to really talk about only what it's talking about, so there's no confusion with hybrids and, as Susan says, mixed fuel type resources. But we'll clean that up. But we certainly didn't mean to imply that we would be tinkering with that policy or doing anything else other than exempting hybrid resources from market power mitigation. Here, this is in the real-time section. We're kind of seeing language repeated that we've already talked about, clarifying how the CAISO will use the various inputs that hybrid resources are submitting. This latter half is copied and pasted from the VER EIR section about those resources that are self-providing a forecast rather than using the CAISO's own forecast. So really nothing intended to be new there, just repeating that language for hybrids expressly. And so now we come to section 34.13.3, which is the language that you likely will see in an early 2021 filing. When I say early, I probably mean the first week of January. So if stakeholders are going to address immediate concerns, I would draw their attention here and bring any compelling issue to us sooner rather than later. But this really is just a clarification that we're saying. We have this language in the tariff about what constitutes a non-compliant deviation from a dispatch instruction. And what we're saying here is that these co-located resources that have a storage component and a variable or intermittent component, it will not be considered a non-complying deviation where the the variable component overproduces based on basically missing the forecast conditions, and that the battery component consumes more. PG&E had a good comment that we should clarify that it is consumption only. We probably will make that clarification, but that's what's happening here. I don't think this is. I don't think it should be too controversial, because it really is just clarifying the policy for this this unique situation. All other sort of voluntary deviations would be such in the tariff. So I'll pause here to see if we have any callers in queue.
We have two callers in queue. First caller, your line is now unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hello, this is Alva. I just wanted to indicate that I've finally understood, since I've been sort of misthinking about this section, and really it is simply a way of flagging a deviation as being compliant or non-compliant. The settlements are going to be the same in either case, whether the deviation is compliant or non-compliant as far as the market charges are concerned. And then there might be other things you do if something is non-compliant, is what I'm understanding, is that would have other implications. And given that, I have to reverse my previous opinion about what Doug Boccignoni has brought up in the past, which is if a solar resource, for example, is unable to support the charging that was embedded in the co-located resources scheduling in a particular period, that should also be considered a compliant deviation. If a battery has to stop charging because solar has gone away, you can't say that's non-compliant, whereas if you start charging from the grid in that period, you're compliant, because you're creating an impossible set of incentives with that combination. So I know you probably can't change it now, but I just wanted to indicate that now I understand what I think I understand what was being talked about earlier, and I have to say I do agree that should also be considered a compliant deviation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ella.
All right, next caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, this is Susan. I've had my hand up for a while, and I apologize, but could you go back to 34.1.5.1 just for a minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to, hold on, let me get back up here too, sorry. Okay. Let's see, 34. Sorry. Okay, there we go. All right. I just wanted to point out, I feel like you didn't quite get the comment and maybe we weren't clear in our comments on the problem in this paragraph, where it says basically hybrid resources are not subject to market power mitigation, but then resources are resources that comprise multiple generating technologies that include non-generated resources are subject to market power mitigation. Anyway, it just wasn't clear if these hybrid resources are not subject to market power mitigation, but hybrid resources are comprised of multiple technologies that include non-generated resources, assuming they have a storage element. Then it just wasn't clear. Is it just that they're not are they subject to market power mitigation, or are they not subject to it? And this last sentence makes it a little confusing when you've added hybrid resources to this paragraph.
Yeah, well, I'll just repeat what I said and say, I agree it's confusing. This sentence is about generic NGRs, which are something completely different than anything we're talking about here. And I think in the next version, you'll see us make better clarifications to resolve the issues you're talking about.
Okay. Now, I did hear that what you said about that, but I just wanted to make sure you understood what we were having trouble with here. Okay. Let's go back to where you just were.
Yeah, I totally understand. And, yeah, okay.
Okay. So we have, okay, we have several issues with this. First of all, this could happen not only in fact, I think this is more likely to happen when the storage resources is discharging than when it's charging. And so it's not that it's going to be getting more charging energy. It's going to be reducing its discharge. So part of our comments here, we're not only, first of all, consuming energy, I think is sort of a misnomer here. It's not really consuming the energy. This is not an end user. It's maybe charging the resource, but it's not consuming energy except in a round trip kind of a sense. But so that's kind of a strange term. But the idea that it's not only by absorbing additional charging energy, but also it will have to be, if it's discharging, it's going to be reducing its discharge. And that sort of needs to be recognized in here as well. Okay. And then,
let me just pause and say I understand and agree. We'll make that clarification.
Okay. And then where you talk about where the output of the is producing above its dispatch instruction such that its output will receive the interconnection service capacity of the co-located resources. Again, it's not that the intermittent resource by itself could, but it's not only the intermittent resource might exceed it, but that it's the combined, if the storage is discharging, it's the combined combination of the two. It's not necessarily just the intermittent resource part.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't think, yeah, I understand what you're saying.
It's because it says that the intermittent resource is reducing above the target such that its output receives it's a combination. It's just not just one or the other. It's the two.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, you at the same time you could say, you know, it's either one of them, but yeah, their output, sure.
Yeah, so it's not, and it's whatever they're doing together, not what one or the other is doing. Although I suppose, I mean, it's unlikely that the interconnection service capacity is higher than just the intermittent resource, although theoretically I guess it's possible, but it's the two together, and that's why that was the nature of most of our comments here. And so anyway, those are the only two things I wanted to know. I'm sorry, one more thing here, where you've got the requirement that you talk about control technologies, where it says such deviations may occur through proper control technologies, okay, that ensure the combined output of all co-located resources and subject to the ISO's prior approval. Well, okay, what you guys said in the policy part is that however the two parts of the resource communicate with each other, then that's going to be up to them. The ISO is not going to get involved. They have to coordinate, and there's nothing, obviously you have to have, if they exceed the interconnection service capacity together, there's going to be some kind of control technology in the interconnection process. But the idea that there has to be some kind of automated or something, some kind of automated thing that has a control of some kind, and the ISO has to approve it in advance and all that sort of contradicts what you said in the stakeholder process, which is however these guys do it is up to them, and that's up to, not our problem. So all of a sudden now it's come into some kind of automated technology that the ISO has to examine and look at ahead of time, rather than just, hey, if they call each other on the phone and it works for them, that's great. So I think this is way more than what you said in the policy, and in fact I think contradictory to what you said in the policy part of the initiative.
Yeah, I feel like I disagree with the premise. I think we don't care what you're doing between each other. That's the hybrid resource model. That's the whole point of the hybrid resource model.
No, when I say we don't care what you're doing, of course you care what they're doing operationally, but in terms of, we were very clear in your proposal that the communication that occurs between the two and the way that they implement this thing and deviate this way versus that way, obviously can't exceed the output limit that they're allowed to, that they must adhere to, but how they do that, and how they make those arrangements between the two of them, you were very clear that was going to be up to
them. Bill, this is Andrew Ulmer. And Susan, I think this language doesn't delve into that communications relationship between the two co-located resources, if there are two. Or the three co-located resources. But it really echoes our expectation that the interconnection customer is going to have this generation limiting control in place.
At the POI.
And the prior approval, at the POI, and the prior approval we're talking about is really dotting that I, crossing that T.
Okay, well, that's a different thing. It's one thing to say you have to have, and again, this is something that's you don't have to put it here because it's already part of the interconnection process to demonstrate that the control technology is in place and that it's functioning properly. What you're talking about here is optional changes that could be made to the two different co-located resources that they are deciding amongst themselves in order to either accommodate the intermittent resource production above schedule or not to, or to do it partially, or whatever it is they do. That's not an automated thing. It's not a control technology thing other than what you've already got in the interconnection process. And the communication is as you said in the proposal, the communication on how they do that and the adjustments they make is up to them. So what this seems to say that you have to have some kind of automated system that will do that, and that was not part of the proposal, and that somehow the CAISO has to approve something. Anyway, this does not seem consistent with what you said in the stakeholder process. We know there has to be some kind of limitation at the POI that's already in there, and that's not changing here. But this is to make sure that you don't even have to use that, because there's supposed to be some communication ensuring that is not an issue, and if they mess it up, well, then you've got that as a backup anyway. But this basically, what you said is that scheduling coordinators and whoever, people that are operating these things would have to arrange this, communicate and arrange this amongst themselves in terms of whatever voluntary adjustments they're making. It's not automated. It's not a system of, it's not a control technology thing beyond what's already there. And what the ISO is going to approve in advance isn't even clear here because you've already said it was up to them. And that I can post, I'm paraphrasing, but that language is really clear in the policy proposal.
Yeah, we'll take the comments back, but I think you're reading more into this language than we're proposing.
Okay, well, it's the plain language of what's here. It seems to be that there's some kind of control technology that has to be in addition to whatever is already there, and the CAISO is going to have to do some prior approval based on something that is not specified here, and as opposed to it being up to the parties, which is clearly what you said in the proposal. So I would ask you to please consider, if you did not mean what this clearly says, then to change what this says.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with your reading of the language, but again, we'll take your comment back.
Okay.
And even though that you have this mechanism in the interconnection process, we may want to echo it here as well. And obviously,
well, then make it clear that this is
if we're talking about any kind of process that's going to require scheduling coordinators for these resources to obtain some type of check on a sheet before they, feel comfortable that they can deviate from dispatch instructions, we'll obviously articulate that very clearly in the DPO.
Okay. Well, if there's any. Okay. If all you mean is that they have to demonstrate that the technology that they have already put in place, which is required, is functioning properly, then, which I would hope the ISO is actually monitoring anyway, but let's forget that for a minute. If they just have to demonstrate that, if that's all you were saying is there's not an additional control technology, but that they have to demonstrate that the one they've already got there is functioning properly, okay, then just say that. But that's not, this implies it's something more, and if you don't mean that, then you should not say that. Or could you say it in a different way?
Okay.
Thanks.
Do you have any other callers in queue at this time?
Yes, we have one more caller. Your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Michael Volpe from PG&E. I just wanted to follow up on Susan's second point regarding the deviation from dispatch. I just want to make it clear, will you be revising the language to allow for the NGR portion to deviate down when both the NGR and the VER are discharging?
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I will move on from here. So now we're in the section on resource adequacy and RAIM. So I'm sure there's no controversy here. Essentially, we're just adding in that hybrid resources will be exempt from the RAIM provisions in section 40.9 for system and local. And I think we reiterate that later. And then I'm just going to scroll far down. And then we have the effective flexible capacity of the hybrid resources is the sum of the values of the constituent components if they were distinct generating units, and that it cannot exceed the hybrid resources net qualifying capacity, which is going to be based on any interconnection constraints for the specific resource. I will pause here before we get up to the, I think we just have the fee for the meteorological component and ancillary services next. But does anyone have any questions or comments on the RA pieces?
We do have one question, caller. Your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Susan Schneider again. I think that this is actually not right because the effective flexible capacity of the storage piece, my understanding of the way that is calculated is that it includes both the positive and the negative, positive and negative values, so it's sort of twice the the charging or twice the 4-hour effect, 4-hour sustainable output. Whereas the VER part is what the VER part is, or what the other part is. So I think that the effective flexible capacity can't exceed the hybrid resources net qualifying capacity. I'm not sure that's really right.
I don't think I'm quite following. It seemed like you were on one issue and then you jumped to the other issue.
Okay. Well, first of all, I must say we asked for clarification on this many times in the stakeholder process. But if you've got the variable resource capacity, the qualifying capacity of that is the ELCC value times the qualifying capacity times the capacity of the project. Okay, and the ELCC value changing monthly. So there's a couple of issues here. First of all, when you have the hybrid resource together, if there are distinct generating units, do you mean generating units in like co-located resources? Because the CPUC decision on hybrid resources, mixed fuel resources, says that you're going to discount the solar part in order to assuming that it's filling the storage part. So if they were distinct generating units, does that still take into account that discounted value on the solar side, or if it's solar and wind?
Well, let me just avoid your question and say, if you're asking the question, it seems like we do need clarification here. So maybe rather than belabor this discussion,
okay.
We'll just commit to addressing it.
Okay. Well, let me say another thing though. The effective flexible capacity of storage can exceed the net qualifying capacity of storage. So when you are adding them together, they have to be able to exceed the hybrid resources net qualifying capacity, because the effective flexible capacity of storage, my understanding is that it includes the positive and the negative side. So it's twice the net qualifying capacity. And so it does exceed, the storage alone can exceed the net qualifying capacity of a standalone storage. Therefore, when you put them in with the hybrid resource, they shouldn't lose that whole range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, a 4 hour, 100. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say, I understand what you're saying. If anyone else from the team wants to jump in here, I think I can't see the Skype sidebar that's happening because I'm screen sharing. But in any case, in the meantime, I think we can commit to come back and revise, clarify this language.
Okay, I think I think it's just wrong.
Oh, I was just going to say, Susan, I think you bring up a good point here, and we should take another look at this and make sure it's right, because, Susan, I think you might have a point here. Okay, thanks.
Yep. Okay. That's what I thought, but I don't want to get ahead of you. Okay. Do we have any other callers on RA issues? I think we're probably wrapping up soon.
We do have a couple other callers. Would you like to just move on?
No, I would like to move on with the callers, yeah.
Okay, caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Sergio Dueñez with the California Energy Storage Alliance. I basically just wanted to echo Susan's comments. We thought this might have been an oversight or a small mistake when you were thinking about how to define the EFC of the hybrid resource, and was wondering what was the logic behind it. But it's comforting in a way to see that you are realizing it could be a mistake in how you established it. So thanks for getting back to us with a clarification or better understanding how the EFC of storage would translate in a hybrid setting. I'll just keep it brief so that other callers can express their points too. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Next caller, your line is now unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hey guys, it's Chris with CES. So I guess it's more of a concern related to the process, because there's no discussion of the EFC value of these resources in the proposals in the stakeholder initiative at all. And so I guess it just seems like you guys are putting this in at the last moment in the draft tariff language process, making policy without really having it be stakeholder or approved by the board, frankly. So it seems like the process needs to really be rethought here. And, you know, I had some concerns that I expressed related to the must-offer obligations of the day-ahead market that were not considered either. And I think, you know, the points that Susan made are probably accurate in how you should think about doing this, but it needs to be stakeholders. So a bit concerning to see this kind of process piece of this at this point, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. You know, perfectly fair. You know, as you know, this we've been trying to proceed at, you know, a breakneck speed in this policy because these resources, you know, are coming online as we speak, and we want to be, you know, we want to match pace with technology. But in any case, you know, fair points
Bill,
on the development.
I agree with you. I totally think you need to move fast on these things, but I just have concern that if you're not going to have it in the proposals at all, it shouldn't be in the tariff language. I mean, you should wait until you get this done, you know, in the next iteration of the initiative if you're going to actually include it, because, you know, there was really no vetting of it whatsoever. But point well taken. If you guys want to move forward on it, I understand. It just seems like it's a process issue that, you know, both those things, that the piece on the day ahead must offer obligations, I thought should be in there. If you're going to include this piece on what the EFC value is, then you might as well throw in the day ahead must offer obligation piece as well. But anyhow, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Any other callers on RA?
We have no further questions in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Here we are. Oh, this is simply. We should have included this tariff language, which isn't critical, but an important clarification. We should have included this in our hybrid phase 1 filing, because this is just clarifying that, you know, this is the fee that's assessed to not only VERS and EIRs, but also now those hybrids that have elected to receive a CAISO forecast. So we're adding this in for clarification. And finally, we are putting in that you know, hybrid resources in addition to NGRs will be eligible to provide ancillary services, and just adding this language here into Appendix K. So that is it. That's wrong. The draft tariff language for hybrid resources. I just want to repeat what I said at the beginning of the call so that everyone hears me in case they weren't on at the beginning, which is that most of what we've talked about and most of this tariff language will not be sent to FERC, will not be put into the tariff until later next year, summer at the earliest. The co-located deviation language, we are targeting, probably a first week of January filing. And so to the extent you have pressing concerns or comments, I would ask you to, raise them to us. We're not going to have another call on this tariff language before we take that to FERC. So if you have, compelling issues on that language, please, raise them directly to Gabe, me, or Andrew. Otherwise, we intend to repost this language in a stakeholder matrix in the next couple weeks. I'll stop here to see if anyone has any questions on process or wants, any final issues.
We have no questions in the queue at this time.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, and Merry Christmas.
Thanks, Bill. And thanks, folks, again. And appreciate your time as well. And this was recorded, as mentioned, MP4 format. Look for that to be available in the next few business days. So thanks so much.
All right. That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.